A long time ago in Batishe, there lived a girl called Aderonke, who was beautiful beyond comparison. Since her father passed away and her mother was sick, she had been forced to live like she was alone. Everyone loved her and wanted to always talk to her because they knew how nice her mother was. But no matter how many men walked up to be her friend, let alone propose to her, she would always turn them down. She would go to the market to sell adire, a colorful cloth business she had taken from her mom. She lived with her mom quietly and loved the life she was living. Her mom was able to do a few things, so she didn't need to be with her 24/7. Her daily routine was waking up very early in the morning, making food that her mother would eat in the morning and afternoon, going to the market square to sell her goods, and then coming back home. As she reached the stage of marriage, her uncles decided it was time for her to marry. So they decided to call her for a meeting and gave her an ultimatum for 1 year to look for a husband. Aderonke knew she would not look for a suitor, so instead of looking for one, she decided to focus more on her business so she could take care of her mother and herself. She hated men, but she couldn't let anyone know why. Every day, Aderonke would come back from the square and tell her mother stories of what happened in the market square. She would tell her jokes before she slept and wake up the next day to continue her routine. Her mother loved her, and she also loved her mother so much. 4 months passed in the 1 year her uncles gave her, and they decided to call her for a meeting. She knew her father's relatives were doing so because they wanted to share the money and gifts from her bride price, and they really weren't interested in her well-being or her mother's. In the meeting, her relatives reminded her about her ultimatum and gave her the excuse that they wanted her to have a husband to provide for her and her mother as her father had died. She left the meeting angry because of what her uncle said. These people didn't care about her, and they still were lying so they could take what they wanted. After the meeting, she headed to the market. Aderonke didn't have any friends but Abike, who lived close to her house and also helped her mother run a foodstuff business. The two of them were very close, and they truly loved each other. They also practically did everything together. They attended gatherings together and went to work together. Abike was the only person Aderonke could talk to, and one day she decided to tell her what her father's relatives had been doing. Abike couldn't believe her ears. She frowned. Aderonke, I understand you're upset, but refusing to marry at all? That's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Maybe your uncles are being greedy, but there must be a way to work with them, she told Aderonke. Aderonke shook her head fiercely. They wouldn't even listen. They just talked over me, spouting tradition and nonsense about family duty. I am not some possession to be battered, Abike sighed. Aderonke's anger was understandable, but defying tradition wouldn't be easy. Yet, seeing her friend's fiery spirit, Abike knew she wouldn't back down easily. All right, Abike said, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Let's not throw in the towel just yet. How about we come up with a plan? A plan so good, even your stubborn uncles can't refuse. Aderonke's eyes widened. Abike always had a way of seeing things from a different angle. You have an idea? Abike grinned. Maybe. First, tell me everything these uncles want. Every detail, every demand. Aderonke, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose, recounted the entire meeting, venting her frustrations as she spoke. Abike listened, intently, telling her everything they said. When Aderonke finished, Adekunle tapped her chin thoughtfully and decided to ask Aderonke a question. "But what do you want, Aderonke? What would a good marriage look like for you?" Aderonke paused, surprised by the question. No one had ever asked her that before. "Respect," she said finally. "A partner, not a possession. Someone who values me for who I am, not just my inheritance." She knew what she wanted, but she still wasn't ready to marry. Adekunle didn't understand what she wanted, so she quickly ended the conversation by saying she needed to get back to work. Over the next few days, Adekunle didn't mind the weirdness of her friend. She then decided to start looking for the right husband for her friend. Alone, she searched and searched for men that would most suit her friend, but to no avail. After a while, she gave up. Aderonke knew what she was doing. She had a secret, and she had vowed to keep this secret till she died. She told Adekunle not to worry as days and weeks went by, and the year her uncles gave her came to a close. She was ready for them. She decided to give them an excuse or two. At the end of the year, her uncles called her again. She went to the meeting. They were annoyed at her lack of interest in this and told her they were going to give her just a few months more to look for a husband. Aderonke was determined to wage war with them if need be. She continued her business and her daily activities. Her mother was on the verge of losing her life, and that was what hurt her the most. She prayed to the gods daily to spare her mother. One day in the last month of the year, she went to work just like how she used to, and in the afternoon, one of the villagers rushed to her stall crying and weeping that her mother had died. She couldn't believe her ears and ran back home to confirm this. Her mother had truly died. She cried and cried. With this happening, her relatives could call her for a meeting and decided to let her be for a month. After that month, they decided to look for a husband to marry Aderonke. Aderonke was a beautiful young woman, so it wasn't going to be hard for them to look for a rich young man who could marry her. They called private meetings amongst themselves and the choices of husbands. All this was going on without Aderonke knowing. She was sad and had grown so lean due to crying and not eating as she was mourning the death of her lovely mother. She vowed to the spirit of her mother not to get married. After some time, she decided to go back to her business, at least to take her mind off the death of her mother. After the first week, she noticed that men had started approaching her like never before, and she was shocked. She suspected it was the works of her selfish and conventional relatives, but she didn't say anything. As the men would come to meet her, she would lay curses on them and insult them. She was bitter and everyone saw that. But the men still didn't relent. Her relatives had to put pressure on these men and even lie to them that Aderonke had a secret land that was of value to them. This made all the men desperate to marry her. All her efforts to chase them away were futile, and she decided to do something to them. One of her suitors decided to visit her at home, and unaware of him, she was planning to cook when she saw him, and then an idea struck in her head. She decided to pour the boiling water on him when he reached the front of her hut. As the man came closer, ready to introduce himself, she carried the pot and poured water on him. He screamed and ran away. Her relatives were angry after they heard what had happened and decided to call her for a meeting. When she got there, One of them spoke up and said, "Aderonke, we are sorry about your mother's death, but this is more reason why you should not be alone. We heard what you did to the man we sent to you, and we will take responsibility for him, but this is just because we understand how sad you must be." They then told her they would be sending another man to her hut on the second day. She decided to deal with this man almost the same way she dealt with the first man. She decided to grind dry, hot pepper. She then poured it into the water and sat in front of her hut to wait for him. As he came to her front, she poured the peppery water on the man and laughed as he ran away. Her uncles called her again to warn her to desist from chasing these men away, but she didn't listen. On the third day, they sent another man to meet her, and this time she decided to chase him away with a huge cutlass. The men were scared of her, and no matter how much her relatives begged, they didn't answer. They refused to attempt wooing her anymore. She was happy to have finally achieved what she wanted to achieve. But there was a particular man called Adekunle. He didn't believe what everyone was saying about Aderonke. They called her a witch and insulted her, and even though he had also heard the stories of the people she cursed, insulted, and chased, he was still willing to try wooing her, but he decided to use another method. Aderonke went to the market happy at what she had achieved. No man was coming to ask for her hand in marriage, and that was enough for her. Adekunle then decided to go to her stall in the market to buy something from her so he could have a better glimpse at the behavior of the woman. When he arrived at her stall, he saw her talking to her best friend Abike. He saw that she was a cheerful girl and a nice one at that. It was at this moment that he decided that he was going to woo her to become his wife. He knew this was going to be a huge, long, and stressful work for him, but he was willing to give it a try for the woman in front of him. He bought Adire from her that day, and he decided that he would come every 2 days to buy from her. After a week, Aderonke noticed Adekunle, and even though she wasn't sure what he wanted, she started being friendly to him. She would share smiles with him when he came and even gave him a discount sometime. After a few weeks, they started talking to each other. This made Adekunle decide that it was time to increase the days he came per week. He then began going to her stall every day. They would talk briefly for a bit, but he still noticed she wasn't really ready to talk as much and decided to take it slower for her. He would come buy something and ask if she was fine. He would sit down if he noticed she wanted to talk and would leave if he noticed she didn't want to. He took to getting to know her as slowly as possible and enjoyed seeing her every day. Adekunle was a trader, and one time he decided to go for business in the neighboring village. He spent a week there, which meant he wouldn't see Aderonke for a week. During this week, Aderonke would always ask Abike if she knew where Adekunle was. She was worried something had happened to him, and she also missed him. He was starting to have an effect on her. After that week, Adekunle came back to her stall, and immediately after she saw him, she burst into tears. She asked him where he had been and even told him that she thought he had abandoned her. He explained what had happened to her and told her he was going to let her know the next time he planned to go to another village for business. Every day, they would meet and talk about one thing or the other. Adekunle noticed that she would always try to avoid talking about her father, but he didn't ask. Even though their meetings were limited to talking in the village market square, Adekunle would come every day to spend time with her. He would wait for her when she was busy, he would help her sometimes to carry heavy things, and he would also sit to tell her stories about his encounters with many people when he went away for business. Aderonke had become so attached to him even without knowing it. One day, she closed her store late and didn't have anyone to help her with her goods. When this happened before, Abike would help her carry some while she carried the other part. But Abike had gone to visit her family who lived 3 villages from theirs. But Adekunle was there. She didn't want to ask him for help, but eventually had no choice but to ask. Adekunle, I need your help. The goods here are too heavy for me to carry. Can you help me carry half while I carry the other half? Adekunle happily stood up and helped her with the load. He even made sure she was carrying a very small amount of clothes. As they walked to her house, they talked about so many things, and when they finally got to her house, Aderonke didn't allow Adekunle to enter and told him to stay outside while she took the clothes inside. Adekunle expected this and decided to wait for her to finish arranging the clothes inside as he sat on a rock outside. When she finished, she thanked him for helping her and escorted him a little bit before going back to her house. On the second day, Adekunle decided it was time to tell Aderonke about his love for her. The second day, he decided to walk her to her house again after her day at the market. Aderonke, I love you. For the past few days, I have seen that you are a good person and not as mean as everyone calls you. You are a beautiful and hardworking woman. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Aderonke was shocked when she heard this. Why didn't she see this coming? She immediately turned to look at him and ran away. She was scared. She had vowed on her mother's grave that she wasn't going to get married, but she was foolish enough to let this go further than it did. She cried herself to sleep that day, and the next day in the market, she decided she was going to tell him to stop coming to her. When he came, he tried starting the conversation like he would always do, but she poured water on him. She embarrassed him in front of everyone in the market. She was the talk of the town for days, but Adekunle did not stop coming to see her. One day, as she saw him, she started shouting at him to leave her alone. She told him he was a bastard and even said all sorts of words to him before he eventually decided to leave. Abike came back a few days later and noticed that Adekunle had stopped coming to see Aderonke. She asked her what had happened, but Aderonke wouldn't say anything. She also noticed that her friend had started acting like she was when her mother died. She tried every means to cheer her up, but none seemed to work. Abike then decided to find time to look for Adekunle and let him know. After 2 days of searching, she eventually found where Adekunle lived and told him everything. In return, he told her what had happened, how he had spoken about getting married to her, and how badly Aderonke treated him afterward. Abike was angry at her friend and went to meet her. She tried not to say hurtful words to her and pleaded that she give Adekunle a chance. After much persuasion, Aderonke decided to invite Adekunle to her house in the evening. They sat outside as they talked. Aderonke decided to tell him why she didn't want to marry. Adekunle, when I was a child, my father used to beat my mother. He kept it secret for years. He would beat her and also beat the living daylight out of me. One day, he beat and punched me to the extent that I started bleeding. When they took me to the herbalist, he told them that I would live, but I might not be able to have children again. I can never forget that day. I grew so much hatred for men because of this, and I don't think you would be any different. That is why I cannot marry you. And even if I eventually get to marry you, I cannot give you children. Adekunle listened to all the things she had to say to him and smiled. When she was done talking, he decided to leave without saying a word. Aderonke was worried. Even though she finally felt at peace for telling him, she was sure that no man would ever want to marry a childless woman. She told him her secret and felt bad. The next day, she lived her day normally in hopes that she would see Adekunle, but she didn't. 2 days went by, 3 days, and a full week went by, but she didn't see him, and she eventually gave up. After a week of waiting, one day she gave up and decided to go home after a long day at the market. She walked slowly, and as she got to the front of her house, she saw a figure in the distance. She tried to figure out who this person was, but she couldn't see the person. She then decided to get to the front of her house before saying anything to the person. When she got there, she saw that it was Adekunle. As she saw him, she dropped her things to the ground and started crying. As she did, Adekunle knelt in front of her. Aderonke, you are my world. I decided to take a few days off seeing you. I can't spend one day without you. I distracted myself with my business so I could take time to decide if I really wanted you or not. I want you, Aderonke. I will not hurt you, I promise on my dead father's spirit. Please marry me. He didn't need to say more. Aderonke immediately agreed and decided to marry him. They eventually got married 2 months after and moved to another village where Adekunle does his business. She was happy, and Adekunle kept his promise to love her every day. This is the end of today's story. Make sure to subscribe to this video and give us a like. You can also share this video with your friends.